Archangel Michael says the world moves in strange ways, and what is hidden in darkness will always come to light. There are moments when the truth unravels itself in ways no one expects. This is one of those moments, a revelation shaking the very foundation of a quiet neighborhood. The police cars arrived without warning, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows against the peaceful streets. No one had suspected a thing, no one had looked close enough to see past the facade. But the truth had been simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to burst forth. As officers approached the front door, tension rippled through the air like an electric charge. The quiet murmurs of the gathered crowd carried a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. Then, with a single knock, the silence was shattered, and what lay beyond that door was far beyond anyone's darkest imagination. Inside the house, a nightmare was waiting to be uncovered. The moment the door swung open, a wave of unease washed over the officers. Something wasn't right, something was lurking in the shadows, unseen yet deeply felt. Type 333 to receive protection from darkness. The suspect stood there, face pale, eyes darting like a trapped animal. There was no attempt to flee, no resistance, only a deep, unsettling stillness. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment, as if they had known this day would come. The officers stepped inside, their boots pressing against a floor that had witnessed things no human should ever endure. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with something unspoken, something that clawed at the back of the mind. Then, the search began, and with every passing second, the horror grew. In the living room, stacks of old newspapers covered the walls, each one carefully marked, each one holding a story that now made terrible sense. The photographs, grainy and yellowed, captured faces frozen in time, faces of people who had long since vanished without a trace. They had been here, in this very house, their fates sealed behind these very walls. In the dim glow of flickering light, the officers moved further inside. A door, slightly ajar, led to a basement. The air grew colder as they descended, their breath visible in the darkness. Then, the full extent of the nightmare revealed itself. Archangel Michael says the shadows hold no secrets from those who seek the truth. The walls of the basement whispered stories of suffering, stories written in pain and fear. Chains, rusted and old, hung loosely against the stone, remnants of something too vile to comprehend. In the center of the room stood a chair, its wood stained with something far darker than time. Surrounding it were notebooks, filled with writings that twisted the mind, words scribbled in frantic desperation. Each page told a story of obsession, of control, of a mind lost to something monstrous. Then came the most chilling discovery, a hidden compartment, seamlessly built into the wall. The officers pried it open, their hands trembling. What they found inside would haunt them for the rest of their days. Type 777 to shield yourself from evil. A collection of relics, personal belongings of those who had disappeared. Bracelets, watches, small trinkets that had once meant everything to someone. Each item held a memory, a piece of a life stolen away in the dark. The suspect stood motionless as the evidence piled up before them. There was no plea, no denial, only silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any confession ever could. Outside, the neighbors watched in horror as the officers led the suspect away. Whispers turned into a storm of murmurs, each person struggling to comprehend how they had lived next to such darkness without ever seeing it. It was a betrayal of reality itself. In the coming days, more details would emerge, each one adding another layer to the horror. The stories of the victims, the patterns, the methodical nature of it all. It was a nightmare woven over years, hidden in plain sight. Archangel Michael says even the most innocent places can hide the darkest secrets. The house, once a home, had become something else entirely. A place where lives had ended, where pain had been inflicted without remorse. People began to recall small, unsettling things they had brushed aside over the years. The way the suspect never truly connected with anyone, the way they avoided certain topics, the strange noises in the dead of night. It all made sense now, in the worst way possible. Investigators worked tirelessly, piecing together the full picture. The victims, their last known whereabouts, the patterns that had gone unnoticed. Each revelation was like a wound reopening, fresh pain layered over old scars. Type 999 to break free from fear. As the trial loomed, the weight of the truth bore down on the community. No one would ever see their neighborhood the same way again. The illusion of safety had been shattered beyond repair. The suspect sat in the courtroom, expression unreadable. The families of the victims watched, their grief a silent scream that echoed in every corner. Justice was coming, but it would never bring back what had been lost. The verdict came swiftly, a conclusion to a horror that had stretched far too long. Life in prison, no chance of parole, a sentence that could never truly match the depth of the crimes. It was justice, but it was also a reminder, evil can exist anywhere, even in the house next door. As time passed, the house was abandoned, a shell of what it once was. Some said they still felt the darkness lingering there, a residue of what had transpired. Others refused to go near it at all, unwilling to face the ghosts of what had been uncovered. But one thing was certain, the community would never forget. They had learned the hard way that sometimes, the greatest monsters were the most ordinary faces. And that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always rise to the surface. Type 111 to embrace the light and move forward. The house stood there, untouched, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the souls of those who dared to glance its way. Time passed, but the weight of its history remained, pressing down on the street like a shadow refusing to fade. Some neighbors moved away, unable to bear the memories, while others stayed, haunted by the knowledge of what had lurked so close to their own homes. Children whispered stories about it, daring each other to step onto the porch, to touch the door, to prove that fear had no hold on them. But even the bravest among them never lingered too long. The air around the house carried something unnatural, something that didn't belong to the world of the living. No one bought the house, no one wanted it. The real estate agents tried to scrub its history clean, speaking of a fixer-upper and great potential, but the walls themselves seemed to reject the idea of being lived in again. It was as if the house knew what it had been, what it had witnessed, and refused to be anything else. Archangel Michael says darkness never truly disappears, it waits, watching, lingering until it is forced into the light. Some places bear the marks of evil long after the evil itself is gone. And this house was one of them. A year passed, then two, and still, it stood there, its presence an unspoken warning. Nature began to reclaim it, vines crawled up the siding, weeds burst through the cracked pavement, the paint peeled in long, curling strips like dead skin. Even the wind seemed to howl a little louder when it passed through the broken windows. Then one night, a group of thrill-seekers decided to test the limits of fear. They weren't from the neighborhood, didn't understand the weight of what had happened there. To them, it was just another urban legend, another chance to feel the rush of adrenaline in the face of the unknown. They arrived after midnight, their laughter cutting through the stillness like knives against glass. Flashlights flickered as they pushed open the door, stepping into the void left behind by those who had once lived, and died, there. Type 555 to protect yourself from unseen forces. The moment they entered, the air shifted, as if the house itself had inhaled. The temperature dropped, breath misting in the beams of their lights. The walls groaned, a sound too deliberate to be just settling wood. But still, they pressed forward, excitement outweighing caution. One of them joked, calling out to whatever spirits might be lingering. The others laughed, but it was a nervous, forced sound. Deep down, they all felt it, the weight of something watching, something waiting. They moved deeper inside, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The living room remained as it had been left, the remnants of police searches scattered about. Yellowing crime scene tape hung limply, a final warning ignored. Then came the basement door. It stood slightly ajar, just as it had been that night when the truth was first discovered. A single glance between them, and then they were descending, one by one, into the dark belly of the house. Archangel Michael says curiosity is a flame that can burn just as easily as it can illuminate. Some places are not meant to be revisited, some secrets are better left undisturbed. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, unnaturally so. Their flashlights danced across the walls, revealing the scars left behind by the investigation, the empty hooks, the old chair, the faded outlines of objects long removed. But something else was there, something they hadn't expected. In the farthest corner, a single notebook lay open, its pages untouched by dust. One of them reached for it, hesitant, fingers brushing against the worn cover. The moment they touched it, the lights flickered, and the air grew impossibly heavy. A sound, low and guttural, vibrated through the space, sending a bolt of terror through them all. The flashlight beams shook as their hands trembled, breaths coming in shallow gasps. And then, without warning, the basement door slammed shut above them. Type 888 to break free from the grip of fear. Panic erupted, screams shattering the silence. They bolted up the stairs, hands slamming against the door, twisting the knob, pulling, pushing, but it wouldn't budge. The house had them now, and it had no intention of letting go. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing against their chests. Shadows slithered along the walls, moving without source, without reason. Whispers curled into their ears, voices that did not belong to the living. One by one, their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness. And then, as if in response to their terror, something else moved in the room with them. Not a person, not an animal, something else. One of them screamed, and suddenly, the door burst open. They didn't hesitate, didn't look back. They ran, stumbling, clawing their way into the night. Only when they reached the street did they dare to glance back. The house stood as it always had, silent, unmoving. But in one of the upper windows, something watched them leave. Archangel Michael says evil does not always die with the body. Sometimes, it lingers, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to invite it in. The group never spoke of that night again. They left town, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed them, that something had marked them. Their laughter was gone, replaced by quiet, haunted stares. The house remained, waiting. Some say they still see movement inside, flickers of light where there should be none. Others swear they hear whispers carried by the wind, voices of those who never left. And so the house remains, untouched, abandoned, and yet, never truly empty. Type 000 to leave the past behind and walk into the light. The house stood like a monument to nightmares, a forgotten relic of something unspeakable. The street around it moved on, children grew up, families came and went, and the seasons changed, but the house never did. It remained frozen in time, untouched by laughter, warmth, or hope. The city eventually made plans to demolish it. Officials called it an eyesore, a hazard, something that needed to be erased. But every scheduled demolition was met with strange delays, machines breaking down, workers calling in sick, permits mysteriously getting lost. It was as if the house itself refused to be erased. Neighbors watched as the structure decayed further, yet no one dared enter again. The thrill-seekers who had run from the basement never spoke of what happened, but the weight of it followed them. Some left town, never looking back. Others struggled with nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat, convinced that something was still watching them. Archangel Michael says some scars do not fade, some echoes never truly go silent. When evil has rooted itself deep enough, even time cannot wash it away. Years passed, and the house became a legend, a whispered warning among the locals. It wasn't just haunted, it was cursed, a place where darkness had seeped so deeply into the walls that it could never be scrubbed clean. One night, a fire broke out. No one knew how it started, no one saw anyone enter, but the flames consumed the structure with unnatural speed. Neighbors stood in their yards, watching as the inferno devoured everything, thick black smoke curling into the sky like a final scream. Firefighters arrived, but there was little they could do. The house collapsed in on itself, the flames raging as if something inside refused to go quietly. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the fire died, leaving behind nothing but smoldering rubble. Type 666 to cleanse yourself from the residue of darkness. The next morning, people gathered at the ruins, expecting closure. But as the sun rose, something unsettling became clear. The basement, the place where it had all begun, remained untouched. The fire had swallowed everything above ground, yet the earth beneath still held its secrets. City officials debated whether to fill it in, to bury it beneath concrete and erase it forever. But workers sent to clear the site refused to go near it. They spoke of hearing voices, whispers rising from the ash. Tools went missing, and the ground itself seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Eventually, the city gave up. They fenced off the area, left it alone, and in time, nature began to reclaim it. Grass grew over the rubble, vines tangled themselves through what remained of the foundation. But no one forgot. No one dared step too close. Archangel Michael says not all battles are won with fire and steel. Some shadows do not flee, even when the light burns the brightest. Years later, developers announced plans to build over the land. They spoke of new beginnings, fresh starts, the chance to create something good where evil had once stood. But when construction crews arrived, they found their machines wouldn't start, their blueprints mysteriously altered. And then, one night, the workers simply left. Their equipment remained, untouched, abandoned, as if something had driven them away. They refused to speak about it, but their faces told the story. Whatever they had felt in that place had been enough to send them running. The land remained empty. No one could tame it, no one could change it. The darkness that had taken root there refused to be erased. And so, the town decided to leave it alone, an unspoken agreement between the living and whatever still remained beneath. Type 222 to walk in the path of protection. People say that on certain nights, when the wind moves just right, you can still hear something. Faint voices carried through the air, whispers from beneath the ground. Some believe it's the spirits of the victims, still crying out for justice. Others say it's something worse, something waiting. The legend never died. Parents warned their children to stay away, old-timers shook their heads at the mention of the land. It became part of the town's history, a place everyone knew but no one spoke of. And though the house was gone, its story was not over. Because darkness, once rooted, never truly fades. It lingers, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to come too close. Type 111 to step away from the past and into the light. The land where the house once stood remained untouched, a scar upon the earth that no amount of time could heal. The town carried on, but the space where the horror had unfolded was left abandoned, a silent reminder of what had transpired. The fence around it rusted, the warning signs faded, but still, no one dared to cross into that cursed ground. For years, it remained undisturbed, a place of whispers and ghost stories. Children dared each other to get close but never stepped too far in. Even the bravest souls felt a chill there, an unseen force pressing against them, warning them to turn back. But then, one day, something changed. Archangel Michael says silence does not mean peace, and an empty place is not always truly empty. There are forces that wait in the quiet, biding their time. A company from out of town purchased the land, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, of its history. They announced plans to build, to develop something new, to erase the past once and for all. The townspeople watched with uneasy hearts, knowing that some things should never be disturbed. Construction began, and at first, nothing seemed amiss. Workers cleared the debris, leveled the ground, prepared to lay the foundation for something fresh. But the deeper they dug, the more unease crept in. Tools went missing, then turned up in strange places. Machinery stalled without reason. A worker swore he saw someone standing in the distance, watching, only to realize there was no one there. Type 444 to guard yourself from unseen energies. Then came the discovery. As they dug deeper into the earth, they unearthed something that should have never been found. A sealed metal box, rusted with age, buried beneath where the basement had once been. It was heavy, unnaturally so, as if something within resisted being moved. The workers gathered around as one of them pried it open. The moment the lid came free, a gust of wind howled through the site, though the sky was clear and still. A foul stench filled the air, thick and suffocating. Inside the box were remnants of the past, old, yellowed papers, strange trinkets, and something far worse. A collection of teeth. Human teeth. The workers backed away, horror creeping through them. The ground beneath their feet trembled, as if something deep below was shifting, awakening. Without another word, they abandoned their equipment and left, refusing to return. Archangel Michael says the past cannot be buried if the darkness that caused it still lingers. Some things are not meant to be uncovered. The project was abandoned within days. The company, without explanation, pulled out of the deal, and the land once again was left to itself. No more attempts were made to build there. It became a dead zone, a place that even animals avoided, a pocket of land forever resisting change.